Why do the kindest, most well-intentioned people often end up last? This is a question that echoes in the minds of many. If you've ever felt taken advantage of, ignored, or undervalued for being too nice, know that you're not alone. In a world that often values aggressive assertiveness and even manipulative behavior, those who choose kindness as a life principle can find themselves at a disadvantage. This reality reminds us of a masterpiece of Russian literature, The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky, the protagonist, Prince Mishkin, is the embodiment of pure and naive goodness. He believes the best in people and always acts with compassion. However, his idealism ends up being used against him, leading him to tragedy after tragedy. Mishkin is, in many ways, the archetype of the nice guy who tries to do good, but finds himself faced with a world that cannot deal with, or does not want to deal with, his purity. Today, we'll explore why this happens. Why does being kind, instead of putting us at an advantage, often put us at the bottom? Most importantly, we'll discover how to balance kindness with assertiveness to thrive in a competitive world. This video isn't just about understanding the problem, it's about transforming it. You'll learn how to recognize patterns of behavior that leave you vulnerable, how to set boundaries without losing your ethical core, and most importantly, how to value your own space without giving up your humanity. If you enjoy thoughtful content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the next videos, where we'll continue exploring topics that connect literature, psychology, and personal development. Now get ready for a journey of self-knowledge and growth. After all, being kind doesn't mean being weak, and that's exactly what we're going to explore now. Imagine this scenario. You're at work, and a co-worker asks you for help with a task that's clearly their responsibility. You accept, as you always do, because you don't want to seem selfish or create friction. But over time you notice that these requests become more and more frequent. Meanwhile, that same co-worker receives praise for finishing the project, while your efforts go unnoticed. Sound familiar? Now think about your personal relationships. How many times have you given in to an argument or accepted something you didn't want just to avoid conflict? At the time, it may seem like the easier choice, but over time, this approach can lead to frustration, exhaustion, and even resentment. These examples illustrate a behavioral pattern that many of us are familiar with, the tendency for kind people to be exploited or ignored. And this phenomenon is not new. In fact, it was brilliantly portrayed in literature by Dostoevsky in The Idiot. Prince Mishkin, with his extreme kindness, ends up being manipulated and marginalized by those around him. He mistakes kindness for weakness, and the people around him do the same. The result: a cycle of exploitation that culminates in tragedy. But why does this happen? The answer lies in the social and psychological dynamics that govern our interactions. In competitive environments, such as the job market, or even in interpersonal relationships, assertiveness is often interpreted as a sign of strength, while excessive kindness can be seen as naivety or lack of self-worth. Who has never heard phrases like, "He's too nice, but he has no nerve," or "She's a great person, but she doesn't know how to assert herself"? These perceptions, although unfair, are common and have a direct impact on how we are treated by others. If you've ever identified with any of these scenarios, whether at work, in relationships, or even in friendships, know that this video was made for you. By the end, you'll have practical tools to break this cycle and learn how to balance kindness and assertiveness. But before we move on to the root causes of this problem, I'd like to ask you a favor. If you found this content useful so far, please like this video. This helps me continue to produce reflective and transformative content for you. Ready to dive deeper? Let's now understand the psychological and social mechanisms that explain why this happens. To understand why kind people often finish last, we need to delve into the psychological and social roots of this behavior. Let's start with a simple reflection. Shouldn't being kind be a positive thing? Isn't that the basis of a healthy society? Yes, in theory. However, in practice, excessive kindness can be misinterpreted or exploited, especially in competitive contexts. The psychology behind the problem. One of the main factors that explain this phenomenon is what we call the nice guy effect. When someone always says yes, avoids conflict, or puts others' needs ahead of their own, this can be perceived as a lack of personal boundaries. In other words, people begin to associate their niceness with weakness or naivety. And, unfortunately, in many cases, this perception leads to abuse or exploitation. For example, imagine that you're in a work group and you're always taking on extra tasks because you want to help out. Over time, your co-workers may start to assume that you'll always be available for these demands. They're not being malicious. In fact, they've simply adapted to the pattern of behavior you've established. But the result is that you end up overwhelmed, while others receive recognition for results that were actually collectively achieved. Another important aspect is the power dynamics in human interactions. Assertive or even manipulative, people tend to dominate social environments because they know how to impose their will and defend their interests. Meanwhile, those who prioritize harmony and avoid confrontation end up giving way. It is as if there is a silent struggle for control of situations, and the nice guys often withdraw from this dispute before even trying to compete. Additionally, there is an implicit social pressure to be kind. From a young age, we are taught to avoid conflict, please others, and put the collective before the individual. These cultural norms are important for maintaining social cohesion, but they can also lead us to neglect our own needs. The result? An emotional imbalance that can culminate in frustration, low self-esteem, and even burnout. Literary and historical connections. This dilemma is not unique to the modern world. In fact, it was masterfully explored by Dostoevsky in The Idiot. Prince Mishkin is a profoundly good man, almost naive in his purity. He believes the best in people and acts with constant compassion. However, his idealism makes him vulnerable in a world full of selfish interests and manipulation. The people around him admire him superficially, but end up exploiting his goodness for their own gain. Mishkin is marginalized not only because of his naivety, but also because his presence exposes the moral failings of those around him. He is a kind of mirror that reflects the imperfections of others, and this generates rejection. Like Mishkin, many of us have faced situations where our kindness is used against us, whether in the workplace, in relationships, or even among friends. But The Idiot is not the only work that addresses this theme. In modern literature and film, we find similar examples. Think of characters like Forrest Gump, whose kindness and simplicity lead him to extraordinary achievements, but also to unnecessary suffering. Or films like The Wolf of Wall Street, where greed and manipulation are portrayed as qualities valued in a competitive environment. These narratives reflect a universal truth. In many contexts, pure kindness is not enough to thrive. Emotional impact. The emotional impact of these dynamics is profound. People who experience this cycle of exploitation often report feelings of exhaustion, frustration, and low self-esteem. They may begin to question their own worth, thinking, "If I'm so nice, why doesn't anyone appreciate me?" This type of thinking creates a vicious cycle, where the person tries to compensate for their feelings of inadequacy by being even nicer, which only makes the problem worse. But here's the good news. Understanding these dynamics is the first step to changing them. Recognizing that excessive kindness can be misinterpreted or exploited is key to breaking this cycle. And that's exactly what we'll explore in the next chapter. How to find the balance between being kind and being assertive, so you can thrive without compromising your ethical principles. Now that we understand the causes behind the phenomenon of nice people finishing last, it's time to explore the solution. The good news is that you don't have to choose between being nice and being assertive. You can balance these two qualities in a healthy and strategic way. Let's start with the first step, recognizing the problem. Recognize the problem. The first step to changing any behavior pattern is to acknowledge that it exists. Think about times when you felt taken advantage of or undervalued for being nice. When was the last time you said yes to something you didn't want to do, or took on extra responsibility just to avoid conflict? These moments may seem small in isolation, but over time, they can add up to a pattern that can damage your self-esteem and well-being. Ask yourself some reflective questions. Am I saying yes because I really want to help, or because I'm afraid of being rejected? Am I putting myself second to please others? How are these choices impacting my life? These reflections are crucial to identifying self-sabotaging behaviors. And do you know what would be amazing? If you shared one of these situations in the comments. Maybe you've already gone through something like this at work, in a relationship, or even with friends. Sharing your experience not only helps you better process what happened, but it also inspires others who may be going through the same thing. So before we move on, leave a comment telling us about a time when your kindness was misinterpreted or taken advantage of. Let's start a conversation here. Practical tools. Now that you've acknowledged the problem, let's get to the practical solutions. Here are some tools you can apply right away to find the balance between kindness and assertiveness. Setting limits in a healthy way. Setting boundaries doesn't mean being rude or selfish. It simply means clearly communicating what you're willing or unwilling to do. For example, instead of immediately saying yes to a request, try saying, "Let me think about it and get back to you." This pause allows you to assess whether you really want to make the commitment or if you're just acting out of peer pressure. Another effective technique is to use phrases like, "I would like to help, but I can't prioritize it right now." This approach is gentle but firm and shows that you value your own needs as much as the needs of others. Self-worth. One of the reasons people exploit nice guys is because they perceive that these people don't value themselves enough. Working on your self-esteem is essential to breaking this cycle. Start by recognizing your strengths and accomplishments. Make a list of all the things you do well and the contributions you've made to others. This simple exercise can change your perspective on your own worth. Balance between kindness and firmness. Being kind doesn't mean giving up your own interests. In fact, true kindness begins with self-care. When you learn to prioritize your needs without guilt, you become more resilient and able to genuinely help others. Think of yourself as a cup of coffee. If you're empty, you can't serve anyone. But when you're full, you can share without draining your energy. Connection with Dostoevsky. Returning to the idiot, imagine how Prince Mishkin might have acted differently. What if he had set boundaries in his interactions? What if he had stood up for his convictions more firmly, without compromising his kindness? Perhaps his story would have turned out differently. This reminds us that being ethical and assertive are not mutually exclusive traits. On the contrary, they can coexist in powerful ways. You now have practical tools to start changing your approach. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this transformation can positively impact your life and how you can apply these principles in your everyday life. Get ready for an inspiring look at how being kind and strategic can put you in a position of strength. We've reached the crux of this journey, transformation. So far, we've explored why kind people often finish last, the psychological and social causes of this phenomenon, and how to find the balance between kindness and assertiveness. Now, let's talk about the end result of this change, how you can thrive in a competitive world without compromising your ethical core. A new perspective. Being kind doesn't mean being passive. In fact, true kindness is active and strategic. It involves carefully choosing when and how to express your compassion, ensuring that your actions benefit others as well as yourself. When you learn to set boundaries and value your own space, you become more resilient and confident. And the best part? The people around you start to notice this change. Think about it. When you act assertively but remain kind, you send a powerful message. You show that you are someone who can be trusted, but also has a strong sense of self-defense. This combination is magnetically attractive, both in professional and personal settings. Instead of being seen as too nice, you are respected as someone who balances ethics with strength. How does this impact your life? Transformation starts with small changes, but its effects are profound. Imagine yourself in your workplace. Instead of accepting every extra task without question, you now consider which commitments really make sense for you. When you say no to something you can't handle, you do so respectfully but firmly. The result? Your colleagues begin to recognize your value and respect your boundaries. The same goes for your personal relationships. By learning to communicate your needs clearly and assertively, you create healthier, more balanced connections. You stop being the person who always gives in to avoid conflict and start looking for mutually beneficial solutions. This strengthens your bonds and generates greater emotional satisfaction. Motivational message. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but every small step you take toward balance makes a big difference. Remember, you don't have to choose between being ethical and being strategic. It's possible and necessary to be both. Too much kindness can put you at a disadvantage, but balanced kindness can put you in a position of strength. Imagine yourself a few months ahead, consistently applying the tools we've discussed. You'll feel more confident, more valued, and better able to handle life's challenges. Your interactions will be more authentic, and you'll be aligned with your principles without compromising your well-being. So, what's the next step? Start today. Pick a situation where you would normally say yes automatically and try saying, "I'll think about it." See how this simple pause can change the dynamic of the interaction. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. If this video inspired you or provided valuable insights, share your experience in the comments. Your story could inspire others to take the first step toward transformation. We've reached the end of this journey, but I hope this is just the beginning of your transformation. Today, we explored why kind people often finish last and how to find the balance between kindness and assertiveness. We saw that being kind doesn't mean being passive, and that setting boundaries isn't an act of selfishness, but of self-care. We learned from Dostoevsky's The Idiot that true strength lies in the ability to stand up for our principles without giving up our humanity. Remember, you don't have to choose between being ethical and being strategic. It's possible and necessary to be both. By balancing these qualities, you become more resilient, confident, and able to thrive in a competitive world. Most importantly, you do this without losing your true self, while maintaining your genuine kindness. If this video brought you valuable insights, I would like to invite you to join this community. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next content, where we will continue exploring topics that connect literature, psychology, and personal development. Together, we can continue to grow and transform ourselves. Finally, I leave you with a quote from Dostoevsky that sums up everything we've discussed today. Kindness without wisdom is like a candle that goes out in the wind. May you find the wisdom to balance your kindness with steadfastness, and may this journey lead you to extraordinary achievements. Thank you very much for watching this far. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share your thoughts in the comments. Your participation is essential for us to continue creating relevant and transformative content. Until next time.